Lähi-idän öljymailla on käyty 20 vuoden aikana 4 sotaa. Vuonna 1991 liittouman joukot karkottivat irakilaiset hyökkääjät Kuwaitista. Kun Persianlahden sota päättyi, Irakin armeija oli lyöty, mutta Kuwaitin öljykentät paloivat. Lännen öljyn saanti oli paljolti Persianlahden esiintymien varassa.
For 40 years, oil men have lived with the knowledge that 60% of the world's oil reserves are in the Gulf region, in that very volatile, rather feudal area where modern forces are constantly clashing with the old religious habits.
Sodan kauhut painoivat jälkensä Kuwaitin entisen öljyministerin mieleen.
When you have your young people killed, when you have young women raped, when you see for pure hatred oil fields are set afire, these are something very graphic in the memory of Kuwaitis.
Kuwaitin kohtalo ja Persianlahden sota olivat 20 vuotta aikaisemmin alkaneen historiallisen kehityksen seuraus. Britit olivat toista 100 vuotta taanneet Kuwaitin ja Persianlahden valtioiden rauhan. Vuonna 1971 monet emiirit tyrmistyivät, kun alueen voimatasapaino yllättäen muuttui.
Our defense planning will be based on the withdrawal of all our forces from the Persian Gulf to take effect by the end of 1971.
The British withdrawal east of Suez left a clear military vacuum in the region, and to some extent a political vacuum. The Americans were ill-suited to fill that vacuum, partly because of our connection with Israel, and largely because the American public did not want to acquire any additional responsibilities around the world, and the American public determines foreign policy.
Presidentti Nixon halusi estää Neuvostoliiton vaikutusvallan kasvun alueella. Persian shahin piti läntisen aseistuksen avulla varmistaa Persianlahti ja sen öljy.
It is significant to note that of all of the areas in the world which pose a potential threat to peace in the world, that Iran is in a very key central area.
Shahi oli halukas, ehkä liiankin halukas, toimimaan Persianlahden poliisina.
Remember, this was the King of Kings. This was a man who insisted on being called His Imperial Majesty. Iran was an empire. Well, in fact, Iran was a nation. It was the Persian nation. But the Shah saw it and built it up as an empire. It was this kind of grandiose ambition that eventually led to his downfall.
Shahi kulutti kerskakruunajaisiinsa $100 miljoonaa. Se suututti maan uskonnolliset fundamentalistijohtajat ja herätti maailmalla epäilyjä Shahin harkintakyvystä.
He tried to identify himself with the great kings and emperors who built vast Persian empires in the past. And he wanted to show the world that Iran's past glory and Iran's future plans did give him every reason to hope for the great civilization, which was his dream, his vision of the future of his country.
Shahi isosi Saksan kaltaista teollista voimaa ja englantilaisten ylväitä juhlamenoja.
Shah of Iran intended to show the world that he had grand ideas and plans for developing Iran, which naturally had to be fueled by the petroleum and its revenue.
Rahoittaakseen kunnianhimoiset suunnitelmansa, Shahi kiihdytti Iranin öljyntuotantoa. Kuninkaiden kuningas ei kuitenkaan kyennyt vaikuttamaan öljyn hintaan.
It is with money from oil that we are building up our country, that we are building the dams, that we are promoting agriculture and industry and the rest of it. We are getting less money for oil, which is something that is exhausted at the end. It's not eternal. It is an eternal source of supply. 20 years, 30 years, 50 years' time, it will finish. In many cases, this is the only source of wealth of some countries.
Myös öljyä tuottavien arabimaiden mielestä länsi maksoi liian vähän.
The entire demand and the expectation in the West of cheap energy, it fueled industrial civilization. The West took this availability of cheap supplies as its own birthright. It was going to be there. The Arabs and the Iranians, as the lingo of the time had it, had no choice. They couldn't drink it, they had to sell it. And this was the expectation, that these people would sell at our prices, that there would be no consequences for the prosperity and for the autonomy and the independence of the West.
Kun Sir Peter Walters tuli BP:n pääjohtajaksi, Britannian valtio omisti siitä vielä puolet, ja öljy-yhtiöt olivat jo kansallismielisen kiivailun kohteena.
Morning, Arthur. How are you?
Vanhan toimiluvan perusteella BP omisti öljyn.
The old concessional system and equity crude was really what BP was all about until perhaps the mid-60s, early 70s, when life changed. But BP was based on Iran and Iraq and Kuwait and the whole system of being probably the best in the world at finding crude, and a company whose fortunes were totally dependent on that old system.
BP sai pääosan öljystään Persianlahden pohjukasta Kuwaitista. Sen alueella on 10% maailman öljyvaroista. Kuwaitin öljyteollisuutta johti pitkään maan hallitsijasukua edustava sheikki Ali Khalifa al-Sabah.
Kuwait was a poor country and a very poor region. To a certain degree, we were better than some of the countries around us in terms of being able to engage in trade and pearl fishing.
Kuwaitin talous oli ennen vanhaan helmenkalastuksen varassa. Siltä meni pohja, kun japanilaiset kehittivät 20-luvulla helmenviljelymenetelmiään. Öljy mullisti Kuwaitin. Vuonna 1938 BP ja amerikkalainen Gulf löysivät öljyä. Kuwait alkoi vaurastua, ja kuwaitilaiset alkoivat karsastaa ulkomaisia yhtiöitä.
My generation was, if you grew up in the Middle East in the 50s and the 60s, the oil companies were monstrous bloodsuckers. Get rid of them. And a brand new world shall be created in the region. The cartel, the Seven Sisters, they had the magic, they had the power, they had the force. And so there was this tremendous sense of these overbearing, powerful entities.